Hi, my name is Elle Billing. I am a chronically ill queer femme, and I'm tired. I'm here this episode and every episode to dig at the roots of our collective fatigue, explore ways to direct our care in compassionate and sustainable ways, and harness creative expression to heal ourselves and our world. And welcome to Hoorf, radical care in a late capitalist hexscape. My guest for this episode is Kristy Sarausky. Kristy Sarausky is a trained recovery coach from Connecticut Community Addiction and Recovery. She has her master's degree in adult education. But she says that's not what makes her who she is, because she's so much more than any title, qualification, or label. Kristy spent her teen years drinking most weekends, and in her early 20s, the same thing. She thought she'd slow down her drinking in her 30s once she had kids, but that didn't happen either. Truth be told, she drank to fit in, which is different than belonging, and to ease her social anxiety, avoid grief, and to escape from the reality of painful relationships and to cope with her high sensitivity. She knew her drinking habits were quite common, and she also knew that they weren't healthy. Alcohol worked really well until it didn't. Then she mustered the courage to address her habits and then their underlying issues, and her whole life shifted. Kristy now works as a gray area drinking recovery coach. She believes we can only make true and lasting change when we come from a place of self-compassion, tender and fierce self-compassion, learning to become compassionate with herself, knowing that she's a worthy person who deserves good and true things, changed her inner world. And now she does the same thing to help guide others to lovingly learn to prioritize their own mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical selves. I'm really excited to have Kristy on the podcast today. Hi, Kristy. Welcome to Hoorf.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you here. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast and to talk to you today.
Likewise.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of people that I've known before, and I've interviewed, my friends and who have interesting creative jobs or who work in caregiving fields. It's always nice to have somebody that I've never met before because I get to learn something new and I get to meet new people. And this is one of those cases where I get to meet somebody that I haven't talked to before we actually connect on camera. Before we hit record, we were actually chatting quite a bit. And I was like, I haven't even hit record yet. We're getting good stuff.
I love this too. People are fascinating.
Yes.
And as long as people kind of hold similar views, they don't have to be, or values, maybe more like that, similar values. They don't have to be the exact same views. Yeah, I just love meeting new people and finding out about people's stories, and it's fascinating. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I think having a podcast with a pretty niche title, I think helps get guests that at least are going to be...
Yeah, we know who's listening and who is not.
Yeah, it's like we're going to be on the same path.
Yeah,
we're all care-oriented, probably a little unhinged.
All very aware that we live in a dumpster fire.
Yes. Yeah. And we're all like working together to try and make it through while building something a little better.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And probably we use humor to cope because
100% deranged, very dry, sadist humor.
Yep. You're my people. So on that note, welcome to Hoorf, which I know you said you'd listened to like 1.5 episodes so far. I don't know if you got to the part where Hoorf is a sound my dog makes. That's where the title came. Yeah, that's where it came from.
Thank you. No, I hadn't heard that, and I was very curious.
Yeah, I have a deaf dog.
Okay.
And she is amazing. And she can bark. She does bark. She's very loud, but she also makes some really interesting sounds. And one of them is Hoorf, like kind of Hoorf sound. She also knows how to whisper. She knows she's not.
Wow.
She is too smart for her own good. She is a cow dog, so she's a very intelligent breed, but she's not very good with cows.
Okay.
So that's why I have her. And at night, she knows she's not supposed to bark because people are sleeping. But if she
Mhm.
wants to wake me up, she gets like right in my face and goes, and the first
That's so
time she did
cute.
it, I was like, are you whispering? Like, how do you even know? But like, I, I don't know. I don't know. She just does. She knows. So there's the whispers, and then she hoorfs and she makes these other really high pitched whining noises that drive us all crazy. But
Well, I love that your name's a tribute to her. I feel like
it
when you
is.
talk about care and receiving care and providing care, for me at least, like our dog, who
Mhm.
unfortunately his time had come and he died last July, was a huge part of my daily care.
Mhm.
And honestly, a really big part of my sobriety journey. He was a rescue. The care I received from him in that relationship was huge. And I think, like, as a highly sensitive person, and you yourself have described yourself as being really sensitive. And I don't know if you identify with the term highly sensitive person as well, but sometimes it's just easier to attune and tune in with animals more than humans. And yeah, so he was just a huge part of my journey. So I really appreciate uh, paying homage to Hoorf.
Thanks. So since you mentioned receiving care from your dog, your dearly departed animal, how have you received care this week specifically, or in the past week?
Well, starting this week, I have not received any care yet. Yet, I am solo parenting at the moment. My partner is away. The kids are at school, so we don't have a lot of supports where we live. So part of my care is making sure that I give care to myself
Mhm.
because I don't have a huge support network. And one of the ways that I do that is spending time in nature. So Monday mornings, once I get the kids out the door, I usually go for a nice long walk first, and that feels very regenerative for my spirit and my soul. And then I always feed the birds and the squirrels in the backyard, and there's something about that feels very life-giving and
Mhm.
supportive. Um, so that's been it so far for this week, but I am going on a trip a few provinces away to visit a friend in a couple days, and I know that will be a very care receiving trip because I won't have to make meals. And
Right?
I won't have to like clean up because I'll be in a hotel room and that kind of thing, and I'm really really looking forward to that reprieve.
Yeah, I have a friend several states away right now who was sick this weekend, and we were texting and talking on the phone, and they this is the first time they've been sick and not and live they're living alone. And
Mm,
like all the other times they've been sick, they've had partners or a spouse or people living with them, and they were just feeling really rotten and lonely, and like,
yeah.
"I need medicine, and I don't wanna get up and go get any." I said, you can DoorDash Walgreens." And they didn't know that. So, like, all these ways that we can, like,
We can receive
yeah, receive
support.
care when we're,
Yeah.
like, solo on our own, but sometimes we still need another person to, like, let us know what's available.
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Okay, have you eaten? Like, what do you have for food? Do you need I can Venmo you for DoorDash if you need." Like, just trying to figure out ways to, like, help somebody who is solo,
Mhm.
um, is such an interesting way of living now.
Yeah, it is. And I think also like lowering our expectations of ourselves, which is hard to do for me, but
Yes.
just saying like, oh, okay, I don't have that extra set of hands around tonight, so we're going to order in for dinner and
Mhm.
not make it mean like I'm a quote unquote like lazy mom or the ways that we shame ourselves and beat ourselves up.
The amount of food delivery that I had when I was going through burnout, like
Mhm.
that is, like, a disability expense or, like, what the ADHD tax or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
That a lot of people, I think, who are either abled or neurotypical or whatever category that I'm not in, that people don't think about. They're like, oh, well, food delivery is a luxury. I'm like, for some people, some of us, it's how we eat.
Yes. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Can't do both.
Right.
Like, and now I live on the farm. We don't have delivery. The amount of mac and cheese I eat, and I just add different things to it so I don't get bored. But I like so much vegan mac and cheese because I don't have to think about it. I can make it on autopilot and it requires no energy input from me.
Yeah.
That's my farm version of DoorDash.
Yeah, fair enough. Like whatever, quick, easy, you can make it happen. We also do that with cereal in our house. There's a lot of cereal.
Huge fan of cereal. Huge fan of cereal. When I was teaching, I would go through periods where I was, even before I went through burnout, where I was just really in it. And I would just have cereal for lunch every day. And one of the teachers in our department, who was from another country in Southeast Asia, she's like, you eat a lot of cereal. Like, it was just so weird to her, which I understand. It's weird to people from the US, I think, to eat cereal for non-breakfast meals. I was like, I am lazy. And she thought that was really funny. And I'm like, it wasn't a joke.
Yeah, or just
like, I don't have time or energy or the executive functioning to plan and pack a lunch.
Yeah.
All I have to do for cereal is buy a few boxes of cereal and some oat milk, and I have lunch for a week. I'm like, then I can just focus on all this other stuff they have us doing at work.
Yeah, I totally get it. Totally understand.
So your website is called Sober Soulmate, and I spent some time poking around on there to get ready for this interview, and I'm just super excited. I think our journeys are at least a little bit similar.
Okay.
Where the gray area drinking was the thing. I've talked about my recovery and sobriety on other episodes before.
Okay.
So people who have followed along on Hoorf for a while, some of this may be repetitive, but for anybody who's listening for the first time, I don't want to leave them out. So like if I had found your website like 5 or 6 years ago, when I quit drinking, or, 10 years ago at the beginning or the end of my divorce, I think my healing journey, I'm just trying to think of like how different it could have looked.
Yeah.
When I started going through my divorce, my best friend invited me to ACOA, which is the 12-step group for people who don't know, adult children of alcoholics. But it's not just for adult children of alcoholics. It's adult children of alcoholics and other dysfunctional parents. So it was the group that originated from like when ALA kids and ALA teens aged out of the program and didn't have anywhere to go.
Yep.
So starting from there, I kind of cobbled together like different strategies and tools from therapy, counseling, ACA. But I didn't even see my own drinking as a problem, even after several years of 12-step. Like I was doing 12-step work and I was still like, oh, this isn't a problem. And then my cousin died. When he was 40 from complications due to alcohol abuse. It was actually when he was trying to get sober. There was this huge domino, very traumatic thing that happened. So he passed away, and that was when I finally was like, I don't need to do this anymore. And I just think like if I had the language for gray area drinking, which now that I do, and I've been sober since 2018, and I look back.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I have I have this lens for looking at the way alcohol is marketed, especially to women and femmes. I just wonder how my story might have been different.
Absolutely.
Right? So all that is background. What can you, because this is what you do, like you do gray area drinking recovery work. Yeah. What can you tell us about gray area drinking and especially how it impacts women and femmes? Because you work mostly with women, yes?
Primarily, yes. Okay. Yeah. So very similar to you. And I really appreciate you sharing that story. And I know it's very hard for us to put our stories into like a 2 or 3 minute blip because there's just so much to them. But I appreciate you sharing what you could and catching me up and the other listeners up to speed. Very similar to you. I struggled with my relationship with alcohol for a long time, but I probably struggled even more with my relationship with denial. Because
ooh. Oh yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Because it's
like I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's true.
True. I know. It's like, oh, I'm in a 12-step program, but I don't have a problem with it. Everybody else has a problem.
I'm working on my emotional sobriety. That's the thing. And then I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't be drinking either.
Yeah, because it's really hard. It's funny that you mention emotional sobriety because that's a big part of the work that I do. And sometimes I have people that aren't sober that want to come into my world and work on emotional sobriety. And I try and very gently convey that that's really hard to do when you're drinking because you always have an off switch. You always have a way to escape your emotional discomfort. And emotional sobriety is all about learning to stay with ourselves through emotional discomfort. So very similar to you.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm sitting with my discomfort right now. I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Okay, let's stop there. So what is there something?
No, it's just like, no, everything is just really resonant.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm thinking about how, like, I always joke that I don't have any vices left. Because I've identified them all.
Yeah, I've identified all mine too, but they're still definitely there. We all need.
It's like if I know it's a vice, is it still a vice? Like if I'm doing it mindfully, that's my joke. It's like if I'm mindfully eating a package of Oreos, like
if I'm mindfully binge watching 12 hours of TV, is it really a problem?
Yeah, like I'm doing it mindfully.
I feel you. Yeah, and so I feel like if there had been more language around drinking and acceptance around different levels of alcohol use and talking about different levels of alcohol use, I may have stopped drinking sooner. But possibly, like you, the way I felt about it was, I guess in the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot more talk about things being on a spectrum versus one way or the other way. And
I mean, I think that's true for a lot of things. I mean, I think one of the things that patriarchal capitalism does really well is put things into binaries. And
100%.
nothing's a binary.
Yeah.
So like you're either an alcoholic or you're not. Well, that's not how it works.
Exactly.
And once you figure that out, you're like, oh, yeah, it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum. And so for the longest time, I really struggled with, I didn't identify with the term alcoholic. So does that mean I don't have a problem? ? Like, I must not have a problem if I don't identify with the term or it doesn't feel quote unquote bad enough.
And I'm not out of control.
Right. Like I'm still going to work. I don't feel like I need to go to AA or rehab. So I guess I just keep drinking because that's what everyone else does. And so these were like the thoughts that I was grappling with for a really long time. And yet there was like this little voice inside that eventually got louder and louder and louder. It was like, it's time to stop. Like you are on the saddest merry-go-round right now of having default plans of drinking Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, feeling extremely hungover and shame on Sunday, and then saying, this is the week things are going to change. And then you don't drink Monday and you don't drink Tuesday. And then by Wednesday, it's like, well, I'll just have a glass. And then one glass turns into two. And then by Thursday, you're recreating the cycle all over again. Except you're getting older and your body doesn't recover as much. And you become I became very aware of the shame that I was feeling about drinking around my kids and tucking my kids in at night, trying to get them to bed a little bit earlier so I could drink without feeling guilty, but I would have already been a glass or two deep, tucking them in and turning my head away from them so they couldn't smell the wine on my breath, because I remember being a little girl and smelling rum on my dad's breath and hating it.
Mhm.
And I was just in this very repetitive cycle of this, and something happened at the age of 36, and I can't tell you what it was, but it was just like this realization, like, this is my life
Mhm.
and this is how I'm spending it. Like, I think I've been sold a big lie. Like, this is what I aspired to, this? And it was just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to quit drinking. I don't know how to get sober. I don't know what, but not this. I am not doing this anymore. And it was a very lonely journey because nobody that I knew that drank like me ever quit. They still drink in the same ways that I drank.
Right. We hear so many stories about, I mean, the classic tale of somebody who's hit rock bottom
Mhm.
and then starts their recovery journey. And I think for a lot of us who were in that gray area, there isn't a rock bottom.
No, I didn't have a
We're
rock
just sort of
bottom.
treading water. Yeah.
Treading water,
I can look back and see like 80% of my bad decisions started at the bar or at Beer Fest.
yeah, absolutely.
And for me too, it was like it was making me physically sick because I have
Mhm.
migraine disease and some mental health stuff and other chronic illnesses, and it's like my medication works better now that I don't drink.
Weird.
Right?
Yeah.
Funny. Like, I can't even have vinegar. Like my tolerance for fermented anything is very
Mhm.
low,
Mhm.
and I was at the point where I was, like, down to 2 things that I could drink without getting instantly sick. And I was like, "Why am I putting in so much effort to find the thing I can still drink?
Yeah.
Like,
Like,
why do I care?"
what does this hold?
Yeah, like, why is it important? And
Mhm.
that was really what it was for me, is like, why like, so I've lost all these other things that I think taste good. Like, I'd put a lot of effort into becoming a beer snob because
Mhm.
I like like microbrews and I like the art of it,
Mhm.
and I'd lost all of that because those beer makes me sick. Okay, well, now what? Okay, maybe I'll find some, like, niche distillery that makes something I can still drink, or, like, I can be into white wine or whatever. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Why do I care?"
Oh, I think you bring up such an interesting point. So, like, there's a few things that I run into over and over again when I'm working with people who are questioning their relationship with alcohol. And a big one is around identity,
Mhm,
because so many of us identify ourselves by our relationship with alcohol. And that you're a drinker, a partier, you like craft beer, or you're a wine snob, or you're a red wine drinker, or a party, the thing. And when we're trying to renegotiate our relationship with alcohol, that can really like be a bit of a mind trip, because you're not sure if you want to be sober, but you're not necessarily a drinker anymore. And I find that like that in between stage of being a drinker and being sober, like what people call sober curious right now, it sounds very like lighthearted and fun and, oh, I'm just going to be open and exploratory, but it can play some pretty nasty mind games on you,
mhm,
being in the drama of not having made a decision one way or the other. And it can eat up a lot of mental space. And like you, I would say, like, I definitely I've been a person who's been on antidepressants since I was 16, and I
mhm,
go back and forth, and sometimes at the same time, between anxiety episodes and depressive episodes. And alcohol is a depressant that makes you more anxious. Like, it's just like pouring gasoline on, like, a mental illness fire.
Don't do that. Yeah. Well, and then, I was so you had said something earlier about the descriptor of or the label of highly sensitive person, and it was
Yes.
one that I had identified with in the past.
Mhm.
But, I have ADHD. I'm neurodivergent,
Mhm.
and I didn't get that diagnosis until I was 36. And the more that I
Mm.
learn about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, the more I'm like, "Oh, that's where I am. That's where I fit." And a lot
Mhm.
of my hypersensitivity, I think, is a combination of neurodivergence and
Mhm.
trauma.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And, trying to quiet some of that down was kind of what I was doing for a while. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why people drink, right?
Yeah, all kinds.
Um, I don't remember what it was that triggered the thought. I think it was about being sort of sober curious, but it being really kind of a mind trip.
Mhm.
Going to Target. You don't have Target in Canada, I
No,
don't
but I've
think,
been to Target.
but you've been to
Mm.
Target. Like, it's to the point where, like, you can't even go to Target and not see, like, wine mom stuff.
Mm-mm.
Like, it's everywhere. When I was growing up, of course, I wasn't, like, super, like, tuned into alcohol marketing,
Mhm.
but I remember, like, the Budweiser commercials, and it all seemed really, like, sports adjacent, but, like, going to Target, I don't really remember ever being aware of alcohol adjacent marketing. But,
Right.
like, now it's like you walk in on Valentine's Day and there's, like for Valentine, there's, like, a huge display and it's all, like, rosé themed pun stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh
Yes Way
god.
Rosé
Yeah.
and Wine
Rosé all day. Yeah.
Mom and, like, the socks that say, like, "Bring me another glass of wine." Like, all of that
Yes.
stuff, like, it's cute and kitschy, and, like, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But at the same time, it's like, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. Then there's a really interesting history behind that, and, have you ever heard of the book Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker?
I have not, but I'm
It
gonna link it
is
in the notes.
excellent. It's excellent. I think you'd really, enjoy it. She talks about how I'm not great with dates,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna say, like, post 2000, probably somewhere between 2000 and 2010, women were identified as an emerging market in
That'll do it.
big alcohol.
Mhm.
Just like big tobacco, there's a very similar trajectory that big tobacco and big alcohol went on, and they started targeting women as an emerging market to boost up their profits.
Yep.
And so that's when we saw a big increase in wine, prettier wine labels, funnier wine labels, like just trying to make everything much more marketable to women. And then it became like we became the marketers of it when we started, like, I'm a wine mom, I'm this, I'm that. And we started, you know, really perpetuating this marketing campaign on ourselves, which is horrendous to see, but it's true. And to me, it's just heartbreaking when I look back now and when I go to places like Target, even though we don't have one here, to see the way in which women and femmes are so undersupported. And instead of giving us the support, the reprieve, the rest, the compassion,
The community care.
the
Yeah.
community care that we need, it's like, here, this will solve your problems.
Have some more wine
Yeah. And alcohol works really well until it doesn't.
until it doesn't. Yep. Because you always have to wake up sober the next day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You always have to wake up sober. And in some ways, and this is going to sound a little strange, but in some ways, I'm very grateful that I did have alcohol when I needed it, because I don't think that I was prepared to deal with certain trauma, with certain grief, with certain realities. And alcohol kept me from having to deal with those things until I was ready. And when I was ready, I stopped drinking.
And that isn't even necessarily a commentary on you.
Mm-hmm.
That says something about the failure of our systems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've heard before that addiction is it's a disease, but it's more a symptom of a social problem.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the community support. I worked in K-12 education for a number of years, and we talk about, they always do like the drug and alcohol spiel. The thing that they just don't seem to make sense for kids or for teachers or for people who are working in at least at that level, is that being socially embedded is the biggest deterrent and the greatest protectant against the other risk factors for drug and alcohol abuse. Like if you're socially embedded and you have a social network and you have a support system, you are less likely to turn to substances to deal with your shit.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
If you had social embedding, right? A support system to help you. I mean, I don't know your whole story.
No. But yeah, we can talk in these generalizations.
In a generalized sense, if we had better, if we weren't so isolated, socially, there would be less of a market for things to numb us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they wouldn't be able to dig their claws in, so to speak, as much. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things that's making me very hopeful about generations, more youthful generations. You described yourself as a geriatric millennial, and oh my gosh.
It's such a silly term, but
I know.
It's what they call us now.
Where we see like a much larger movement in younger generations of not drinking and sober curiosity. And we are seeing the boom, of course, like in alcohol-free alternatives, alcohol-free beers, which is like, I have mixed feelings on that. But also like talking about your mental health is much more acceptable than it used to be. Talking about going to therapy is much more accepted and even in some regards celebrated with certain generations. And it's like you can see that being socially embedded helps.
Yeah. So speaking of like, okay, we're geriatric millennials and talking about our mental health and stuff. There's a lot of more awareness about generational trauma and how it impacts, everybody, or not everybody, but like how it impacts people and families. So I read a little bit on your website. There was one line that I pulled because I thought it was really powerful. That if you can pass along your wounding, you can pass along your healing. And that just, I wanted to dance.
Yeah.
Because for one, I've seen it. Like I've seen it happen. Like the more I heal, or the more my sister heals, or the more anybody in the family heals, like it ripples.
It does ripple.
I have a friend, my friend Bunny said recently, healing isn't linear, it's mycelial.
Yes.
It was one of the most beautiful images.
I'm seeing it in my...
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah. The structures, the mushroom root structures.
Yeah, because it doesn't just affect one person. You don't heal in a line. It just, you heal out and around, and it impacts people around you. And so in your work, you work with people, and like you said, I mean, that was part of, I guess, your manifesto, or your about me, or your whatever. Like you can pass along healing. So what kind of healing work are you doing with people, and are you seeing with your clients?
So I work with, it sounds like two distinct groups, but it's not. People who identify as gray area drinkers and they want support in their sobriety. And then I also work with primarily women who identify as having a mother wound, and have a very difficult relationship with their mother, whether they are in relationship with their mother or not. You can still have a very difficult relationship with your mother, even if you're not in a relationship with her anymore. And what I have found is that the people that come to me for mother wound healing don't necessarily identify as gray area drinkers, but all the gray area drinkers that come to me definitely have some mother wound healing that they have to do. And I think one of the things that we often can shy away from that term because we think it's like mother blaming and shaming, and here's just another way to heap on to women, which is never ever my goal. It's about extracting ourselves from the narratives that people have given to us or we have grown up with, and foraging our own path forward and taking care of ourselves. So the way that I see this is like they start working on their own stuff. They start acknowledging and processing the anger they had at the trauma or the lack of attunement that they received as a child. And a lot of it is like working with that anger and working with the grief of what happened and shouldn't have because you didn't receive proper nurturance or protection or guidance, or what didn't happen and should have. And then taking those pieces and figuring out how you can start getting those needs met through like a process that I call remothering.
I've heard that term before, or reparenting.
Reparenting, yeah. It's a very powerful, empowering process, but it comes with a lot of grief, a lot of grief. And I think grief work is paramount to this process, and also offering ourselves so much compassion because we didn't know any differently at the time. The maladaptive behaviors that we took on, whether it's, drinking in excess or sex or shopping or scrolling, whatever the thing
People
is,
pleasing.
people pleasing. You're looking for relief. That's all it is maybe not in the most adaptive way, but just looking for relief and learning to like cut yourself some slack and show yourself some compassion, and then learning how to get those needs met in more adaptive ways.
That's really powerful. I know I've been through the anger and grief process.
Yeah.
And there's 3 kids in my family. It's my brother's the oldest, I'm the middle, and my sister is 2 years younger than me, and I'm the one that is home with my parents now helping take care of my mother. And I try to speak as positively as possible about her and our situation since this is a podcast, and, like,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
try to be very consent-based in how I speak about my parents.
Yeah.
My mom and I had some really difficult years, and I've definitely been through the anger stage.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that I've grieved. There came a time where there were things we learned about, her mother and her mother's mother that really shed a light on
Yes.
why things are the way they are on that side of the family, and it was illuminating. And,
Mhm.
it didn't excuse
Mm-mm.
it doesn't make anything okay, but it explains how things
Yeah.
happened the way they did. And, when you said the word compassion, like, having compassion for myself and the choices that I made and those maladaptive, like, earlier I said, "I have no more vices left." Well, when I did have vices, like, I was just doing the best I could.
Yeah, for sure, and you were.
Compassion and accountability together, and that compassion for myself, but also when I learned to have compassion for my mom, like, it broke me open.
Yes.
Like, it was not something I expected.
Mhm.
I mean, of course, there are still times that are tough, being a caregiver for an aging parent who hasn't dealt with their shit
Yeah.
and who now has a progressive illness is its own
That's so
kettle of
much.
fish.
That's so much.
I can testify to the power of working on the mother wound because I wouldn't be able to take care of my mom with compassion and with a focus on consent and keep my sense of humor when things go wonky around here if I hadn't really spent time working on those things and really digging into them. And I
Yeah.
think what you do is so important, and I think it's really understood. It isn't
Yeah.
understood enough as something that we can do before people are gone. Like
Yes.
there are things to grieve that have already happened, and by working through them we can have peace now while
Yes.
people are still with us.
Yes. I I think you're absolutely right, and a big part of it is finding the ability to extend that compassion. I'm really glad for you that you were able to get some answers, like looking through your family history with your mom and her mom. And it, like you said, it doesn't excuse things, but it shines a light on why. And when you understand why, and then it's like, oh, she did that because XYZ or how she was raised. It wasn't because I'm bad. I'm a bad daughter, or I'm an ungrateful daughter, or I'm, X, Y, or Z, filling in the blank.
Mhm. Any of the other lies our brains tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not because I'm a bad person. It was just that was the best that she could do with what she had. And 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 being able to hold that nuance for a lot of people that grew up with immature parents is very hard because we often grew up in these um for lack of a better term, like black and white households with black and white thinking.
It gets back to that binary.
Right. I'm the parent, you're the child. Like all these black and white roles that we fulfill, this binary thinking. So when we come into this healing part, it's a lot of new mental work and new programming in your mind because you can say, yes, my mom did the very best she could and I needed more. Or she did the very best she could and it wasn't good enough. And let both those things be true and not let one hugely outweigh the other. It's hard work.
Holding that tension.
Yeah. And
holding it gently.
Gently and yeah. And it's okay if you go off the deep end of one of those, and let the pendulum swing until it, settles in the middle again. Because it's also that anger within you might come back when you reach a new stage in your relationship with your mom or you uncover new information or whatever. And that's okay. We don't have to lock it up and put it in a box and put it away.
Mm-hmm.
Or the grief, our grief comes all the time. And as your relationship with your mom progresses and eventually finishes where it's going to earthside.
Yeah, there's always new grief because of the nature of her illness. There's just a lot of anticipatory grief too. It's never ending.
Yeah.
It just has it just looks different.
Yeah, anticipatory grief. I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think with mother wound healing, there's so much disenfranchised grief. It's grief that isn't recognized in society.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say anything bad about your mom without coming off as being really ungrateful because, moms know best and family is everything. And when that hasn't been your experience, it's like grief with no place to go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for being here. If listeners would like to work with you on either gray area drinking or their mother wound or both, how can
Mm-hmm.
they find you?
The easiest place is at my website, which is www.sobersoulmate.com. podcast.com, and it's spelt the way you would think it is.
Okay. Yep. And I'll link it in the show notes as well.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Kristy. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hoorf. To view the complete show notes and all the links mentioned in today's episode, or to get a full transcript of the episode, visit hoorfpodcast.com. That's HOORF podcast.com. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they're released. And if you're enjoying our podcast, I'd love to have you leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. Reviews are one of the major ways that Apple ranks their podcasts, so even though it only takes you a few seconds, it really does make a difference for us. Become a patron. For $3 a month, you can support the creation of this podcast, pay my editor, and join a community of fellow caregivers out here just doing our best. Thank you again for joining me, Elle Billing, in this episode of Hoorf. Until next time, be excellent to each other. Hoorf is hosted by Elle Billing at Elle and Wink. Audio editing by Ricky Cummings at Ricky Poo. Music composed by Ricky Cummings. Hoorf is a production of Elle and Wink Art Studio, all rights reserved. Hoorf Podcast can be found on social media channels at Hoorf Podcast, at HOORF Podcast.